Now, in the end, all of life revolves around submission to some authority. Now, that's God's design for mankind, where God is the creator of the concept of authority, because legitimate authority is anchored in truth, and God is truth. When God, as the author of truth, created the world and mankind in His image, the Creator, God, inherently possessed the complete right to require performance in adherence with His design. When a creation does what the Creator designed, then there is purpose, there's freedom, and there's a fulfillment for all the desires instituted by that Creator. But Lucifer, the devil, decided to rebel against the authority of God. His goal was to destroy God's highest creation and the relationship between that creation, mankind, and God Himself. This resulted in what we call the fall, and resulted in sin, where all of creation was cursed, and breaking that perfect relationship of fellowship between God and man. Even after God foretold His greater plan of redemption through Jesus Christ, the devil continued to rebel by resisting and seeking to destroy mankind. Humankind became so evil, we recall, that God had to enact I'm going to use the term, a great reset called the flood. Creation was reset, but mankind continued to rebel. According to biblical prophecy, God will enact another great reset due to man's rebellion to His authority and rejection of God's Son, Jesus Christ. And so, during the approaching great tribulation, this earth will be severely judged and burned with fire. The world will experience again another divine great reset, which will take the world into then the final 1,000-year millennial reign of Christ. So divine resets are necessary due to sin and the efforts of the devil to destroy God's plan of redemption for all mankind. So God will oversee these particular resets as I've called out. As a normal, counterfeit style, the devil, though, in his continuing efforts to oppose God's authority, is now seeking to implement what today's globalists refer to as a human-led great global reset. In reality, it would be more accurately labeled as the Great Rebellion to God Himself, since it seeks to impose Luciferian goals, to displace God as the highest authority, and to attack and persecute all of those who continue to submit to God's divine order and to reject their usurped authority. Today on Stand in the Gap, Pastor Isaac Crockett and I will begin a two-part series entitled The Great Global Reset and the Advancing Beast System. Our special guest, author, researcher, independent investigative journalist, Leo Hohmann. This week's focus will be on the what and the who, where we'll define the terms, identify the goals, and call out the core people and organizations who are leading in this demonically led and rebellious great global reset. Next week, in part two, we'll focus on the why, the how, and the when of this global reset, and the linkage of the rise of the prophesied Antichrist. And with that, let me welcome to the program right now Leo Hohmann. Leo, you've been with me and Isaac many times on our Stand in the Gap Today radio program. You've been on this with us years ago, but it's great to have you back today with us on this program.
Absolutely. Good to be with you, Sam, and Isaac.
Leo, let's get right into it right now. We've got a lot to talk about. You have done perhaps more writing on this subject than anybody that I know. We've talked about it a lot, and that's why I wanted to have you here. But let's get into this as we go at this area. Before we get into the goals, or necessarily the Great Global Reset and who they are, I'd like for you to define what is meant by those who are using this term Great Reset right now, and identify, if you just a quick overall perspective, what's their end goal?
Yeah, when they talk about the Great Reset, Sam, it's really, they're trying to make it sound like it's something new and exciting, and they've put out all these videos on the World Economic Forum website, And the governments have chimed in. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, the United Nations have all come out with promotional type statements, videos, and what have you, saying it's going to be a great reset, and it's all thanks to the COVID pandemic. Let's take Klaus Schwab, for instance. He is the executive director and founder of the World Economic Forum. And as soon as COVID hit in earnest, it was around March of 2020, he came out and said the pandemic represents, this is a quote, the pandemic represents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine, and reset our world. And so he is the leader of this global institution that's been around since like 1971, heavily inspired by Henry Kissinger, one of Schwab's old friends. They met at Harvard University. And he's coming out as the leader of this elitist group saying, we don't view COVID as a catastrophe as much as we view it as an opportunity to change our world, to reflect, reimagine, and reset our entire world. And by that, he doesn't mean just the economy. He means the entire social system and social fabric of the Western world in particular. And so basically, they have three components to this new world order.
Well, Leo, if I could,
yes.
Let's go into detail further on that. But in a couple of words, what is the end goal of this great reset that you're talking about? What is their end goal?
Same goal as the New World Order, global governance.
Okay, let's just hold it right there. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us. We'll come back. We're going to get into further detail, and we'll describe. I'm going to ask Leo to actually give some further names of people and organizations as we get into this issue of the global reset, and we're going to connect the dots between that, the New World Order, and is it, in fact, what the Bible has been talking about, prophesied as the coming one world government under the Antichrist? We'll connect these pieces in the next segment.
Truth, flexible or permanent? The Bible, ancient history, or powerfully relevant? Culture, a reflection of enlightenment or warning signs? The pastor, commentator, or frontline combatant? Every day, American Pastors Network speaks to these questions where and when they matter. With hundreds of affiliate radio stations nationwide, a website and mobile app screening today's headlines through the twin lenses of the Bible and the Constitution, educating, informing, equipping. This is the American Pastors Network. The time is now to stand in the gap for truth.
Well, Leo, we are so glad to have you back on this program talking about this, and I know you and Sam have talked about some of these similar issues on the radio, but you brought up, so the subject we're talking about is the Great Global Reset, and you brought up a phrase, New World Order, and I might be showing my age here, but I don't remember Henry Kissinger and things he may have done. But I do have some memories of President H.W. Bush, or George H.W. Bush, back in the late 1900s. We're already going back to last century. I speak as a millennial. To some that might make me sound old. To you guys it might make me sound young. But I do remember that there was some kerfuffle, and as I got older, I remember going into more detail of it, where he actually used that kind of terminology, this New World Order. And he's not the only person that has done it. Other world leaders have done it, and a lot of our presidents, his son, Obama and Biden, different ones, have used similar terminology. So from what you were saying, I'd just be interested to see you connect the dots here. Is there a difference, or is there similarity between these terminologies of the Great Reset and the New World Order? Because I think for those thinking, late 1990s and beyond, that was kind of one of those trigger terminologies that we recognized. Now we hear this Great Reset. Is there a connection there?
Absolutely. There's nothing new about the Great Reset. It's a new phrase that's been, not around more than a few years. However, it is just a rebranding of the old New World Order. So where they used to talk about the New World Order, they now talk about the Great Reset and Build Back Better. That's the catchphrase, the slogan of the Great Reset. So when you see Joe Biden name one of his signatory bills through Congress, the Build Back Better bill, you know that he's getting his instructions from the World Economic Forum, and he's on board completely with this Great Reset, which, as I said in the first segment, aims to completely restructure the global economy and the social structure, basically to go from an analog system to a digital system. They want to replace cash with digital money, and they want to replace that card in your wallet, that ID card, they want to replace that with a digital ID. So digital ID and digital money and a digitized economy are the markers of this New World Order, AKA Great Reset.
And Leo, I think that's great because people, I think, can grasp what you're saying, because you didn't say it, but you are saying it. Digital money, digital ID, in a new world system where, in fact, you have a world government, not individual national governments. To me, that says 100% control, the ability to control. Okay, now let's go back and build out a little bit more now. You've already mentioned the name World Economic Forum. Isaac has mentioned H.W. Bush, president, who talked about the New World Order. You've already mentioned the name of Klaus Schwab, who runs the World Economic Forum. Take and build out a little bit now names and people or organizations that actually are the drivers behind this now modern effort, New World Order recast as Build Back Better, Great Reset. Who are they?
Yeah, they are basically the global elites. I call them a predatory class. They are encapsulated by people like Bill Gates, George Soros, Henry Kissinger, who goes back to the 60s, you know, with his philosophies and his influence on governments. He's 98 years old and still going strong. You got the Rockefeller Foundation. You've got the central banks throughout the world who are 100% on board with flipping this system from a cash-based, analog-based, digitized system. They're all on board with it. The largest corporations, 90% of them at the Davos meeting, the annual meeting that the World Economic Forum holds in Davos every year. They just had it this year in late May, and it was said at that meeting that 90% of the large corporations are on board with this Great Reset, which involves a social scoring system. They call it the ESG system. And 90% of the companies, of the largest companies, are on board, and they're going to put pressure on the smaller companies under them to go on board with this program. In other words, if you don't completely buy into this agenda, which includes, you know, not only digital money, but the whole transgender, the whole LGBTQ agenda that we're seeing put in our faces every day, if you're not, the whole environmental net zero carbon program, if you're not on board with this, they won't do business with you as a smaller company. And so it really is a top-down, pressurized system to get everybody on board. And we haven't even talked about the religious angle to this thing yet.
Well, so Leo, as you're discussing, you know, these different elites, that, as you call them, could you kind of compare and contrast what we see in the Bible about the one world government that appears during the 7-year tribulation? This, I think you call it a beast government. Could you compare that with what the goals are? You know, you mentioned the World Economic Forum and their meeting they have in Switzerland every year. Maybe a group like that seems to be working with the elites. Could you compare and contrast those goals with what the Bible tells us to see and to expect in those end times during the 7-year tribulation with a one world government?
Yes, I think when you mention one world government, a lot of people are looking, you know, they've got their eyes in the wrong place. They're looking for some sort of a world parliament that's going to put down the gavel and say, we are now convening the world parliament of governments, and we will, you know, call the shots from here on out. There'll be no more national governments. It's not going to be as obvious as that. The World Economic Forum has the plan. It's called PPPs, public-private partnerships. So you've got governments in league with the private sector, the biggest banks, the biggest corporations, as I mentioned, then putting pressure on the smaller companies below them to all get on board with this system. And if you don't buy into it, you are going to get a negative social score. This played out in real time in the Canadian trucker uprising a few months ago. If you recall, the people who were involved in that protest, what happened? The banks shut down their bank accounts. See, so with digital programmable money, if you don't obey the system, your bank could then shut down your account. See, and so this is how insidious the program works. PPPs, where you've got government in league with private business trying to control the population.
And so, Leo, I want to follow up on one thing you just said, because I think it's very astute. And that is that the description of this one world government control may not actually be one body, one parliament, but as much as a philosophy, an approach to governing that all of the other power brokers in the world, nation leaders, corporate leaders, all buy into the same philosophy, which includes what you're talking about, digitized money, tracking, and credit scores. That's what you're saying, am I correct?
100%. Pippa Malmgren, who is a global insider, globalist, who's an economist and advisor to presidents and prime ministers around the world, she spoke at the World Government Summit back in, I believe it was March of this year, and she said that we are on the verge of a new financial system. She said we're going to abandon traditional money and we're going to go to a new system of money and accounting. It's called blockchain. And she said we will have a near perfect record of every transaction that occurs in the system. And the key word there is system. This is not so much as a global governmental body meeting to put down the gavel and open meetings and issue new edicts worldwide as it is a system of commerce, a system of government, a system of even religion. And we can get into that in a little bit if you want. But what it all boils down to, when you put these three components together, the economic factor, the governmental component, and the religious component, is which involves, in my opinion, a form of earth worship and involves depopulation. You have really a system that is like mankind's attempting to rebuild the Tower of Babel.
And boy, we could go down that road, but I think you've laid out the picture. It's man's attempt, as I laid out in the beginning, man's rebellion against God and God's plan. And so, all right, so that's where it is. Now let's conclude this segment with this question. Go back to the World Economic Forum goals. In that last meeting that they had a couple months ago now from the taping of this program, it seemed to me, and I think you wrote an article on it, where it seemed to me as if they were racing almost against the clock. They seem to be in an urgent mode, on steroids as much, driven by some super drive to get something implemented soon, as if the clock was ticking. Can you speak about that? Did you sense that as well?
Absolutely. I think they are so far invested in launching this new beast system, Sam, that they know their agenda is now out there. The lines are not as blurred now between good and evil as they were pre-COVID. They've taken off the mask. They've shown the world just how coercive they can be. This system that we've been talking about, if there's a one common denominator, it's very coercive. It does not tolerate dissent. It does not tolerate anybody resisting. It says, even in the UN Agenda 2030 documents, that no person will be left behind. They are coming after us. You cannot be a sovereign citizen, a free individual in this system, okay? And so they know now, because of their restrictive COVID rules and edicts and, just coming down with fiat declarations that were not passed by any legislative bodies. They know their policies are very unpopular, Sam. A lot of people don't like being told what to do to this extent. And so that's why I think they're going to lower the hammer and really move quickly, because if they don't, it's going to get out of control. They're not going to be able to implement the system that they have so much invested in.
And Leo, I think that observation, I'm just going to make a comment before you go into the break. That is my observation as well. And it almost seems, as we tape this program, it almost seems like there's almost a focal point coming up in the August, September of 2022 time frame, that so many factors are coming together almost into a head, and what supports what you are saying. When we come back, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to ask Leo to explain why he is using the word beast system, and why we've actually used the word beast system in this title to explain what is happening as it would relate to what the Bible tells us about the Antichrist coming one world government.
Stand in the Gap is produced and recorded in the studios of Lighthouse TV. Positively different.
Well, Leo, this first part of talking and discussing the Great Global Reset and the connections here, it's been very enlightening, it's helpful. So I just want to get kind of a recap from you from this first part, and then you've agreed to hopefully come back. We haven't scared you off. You've been on with us so many times, but to continue into this even more in our next program. But as far as just wrapping this up, you've been talking about a beast system, and you've been talking about what the Bible says about a one world system. You've been talking about the New World Order that we heard of late last century, which for many of us just feels like yesterday. And you've been talking about this new kind of woke term, Great Reset, and how big businesses are getting involved, and how it's a whole change of agenda. Could you just kind of talk to us, why are you using the phrase beast system to describe what's going on?
That's a great question, Isaac. The number one reason that I use this, there's a couple of reasons. Number one, it's oppressive. And it's not just oppressive on a national or regional level. We've always had totalitarianism in the world. We've always had totalitarian regimes, whether it be the Soviet Union or the Nazi system. But this is a little bit different because it is truly global in scope and global in its oppression. So that's number one. But number two is it is particularly oppressive to God's people and anybody who holds to a higher authority. That is the number one characteristic of this system. Like any totalitarian system, they do not want you to answer to any other authority. And the other thing I look at, Isaac, and I say, okay, this looks like the coming beast system, is in Revelation 13, it talks about nobody will be allowed to buy or sell. There's that commerce, that economic aspect to it, along with the religious and the governmental that we talked about. And so when you see the vaccine passports being implemented last year and the beginning of this year, 2022, that seemed like a test run, didn't it? They threw it out there. They saw how many people would jump on board with it. They gathered up all the data. They know who the resistors are now and who is likely to resist them when they roll out the final beast, the actual beast system. And so I think that was very telling to us as to what road they were going down. And it's also very useful to them, these globalists. They now know who will resist them when they roll out the mark of the beast.
And Leo, great place to complete. Be with us next week. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to terminate this program today. and come back next week, because we're going to pick up on this. We're going to ask Leo to build out further the why. We'll build in the religious piece that he's referred to. We talked about the beast system. It's oppression, and it's oppression to those who have a higher authority. So if you're a Christian, you need to listen, because this is where the object of the beast system is to crush the people of God and to force submission. That's why we need to pay attention to this. Thanks for watching us today. So glad for your prayers and your participation, and I ask that you communicate to us today. Let us know this week that you're watching this program and how God is using it to help you in your life.